everybody, and welcome to this video which goes through Zimbardo and the Stanford prison experiment. This is part of the social influence topic for Stage 2 psychology. Let's get started. So Philip Zimbardo, pictured here, conducted research at Stanford University in 1971 to explore the psychological effects of perceived power within the setting of a fake prison. This fake prison was actually the basement of Stanford University, which was also the psychology department. It was a hugely controversial experiment and the inspiration of two feature-length films, one of which pictured here, that we either will or have watched in class. Zimbardo investigated if brutality reported among prison guards was due to situational rather than dispositional factors, which I've talked about in my previous video on the Milgram obedience experiments. But to recap, situational factors are the factors regarding the environment, whereas dispositional factors are factors regarding the individual, things like personality, intelligence, genetics, etc. Zimbardo advertised at Stanford, asking for participants to take part in a study of the psychological effects of prison life. The 75 applicants who answered the ad were screened via diagnostic interviews and personality tests to eliminate candidates with psychological problems, medical issues, or a history of crime or drug abuse. Zimbardo and his team then selected 24 men judged to be the most physically and mentally able and the least likely to engage in antisocial behaviour. Participants did not know each other prior to this study, and participants were paid $15 a day to take part in the experiment. They were randomly allocated to the role of either guard or prisoner via a coin flip. Participants were unexpectedly arrested at their homes by real policemen, handcuffed and taken to a real police station where they were booked. Zimbardo was able to get the cooperation of the local police department to make this possible. Prisoners were blindfolded and transported to the basement of Stanford's psychology department, which had been transformed into a mock prison, where they would stay for 14 days, which was the intended duration of the experiment. Upon arrival, prisoners were stripped naked, deloused and given a new clothing of a smock, a nylon cap, a prison number to replace their names, and a lock and chain around one ankle. Guards wore khaki uniforms and reflective sunglasses to prevent prisoners from seeing their eyes, which relates to de-individuation, which we'll talk about in a moment. So all of these factors were introduced to make it more lifelike or more realistic as to what a prison was perceived to be. Prison guards were told by Zimbardo to assert their authority over the prisoners however they wanted, with the exception of using physical violence. Zimbardo told all the participants any acts of violence would terminate the study, and all participants would be exempt from the payment agreed upon for their participation. Prisoners were exposed to a range of humiliating and degrading acts from the guards, along with physical punishments. The prisoners became dehumanized, and basic necessities such as eating, medication, and sleep were taken from them by the guards. Now, despite the no violence rule, physical altercations did occur. At this point, Zimbardo wanted to continue the experiment to get more meaningful results, and was also acting as the superintendent of the prison. De-individuation rapidly occurred with both guards and prisoners being immersed in their roles, and they lost their sense of self. Participants also lost touch with reality, that they were participants in a psychological study, and started to believe that it was an actual prison. Less than 36 hours into the experiment, prisoner number 8612 started suffering acute emotional distress, uncontrollable crying, rage, and confused thinking, yet was not immediately released from the experiment. Prisoner 8612 demanded a meeting with Zimbardo and the guards, who told him he was weak and could not leave. After this meeting, his distress escalated, and supervising psychologists realized they needed to release him. At first, Zimbardo believed that 8612 was faking it, hence he kept them in the experiment. Despite prisoner 8612's departure, the experiment continued. The experiment started getting very much out of control of Zimbardo and his team, with prisoners attempting an escape, a rumour of 8612 returning to break the other prisoners out, and the replacement prisoner of 8612 going on a hunger strike. This fueled more brutality, humiliation, and abuse from the guards. Dr. Christina Maslach, a previous PhD student of Zimbardo's, viewed the experiment for herself, during a visit and raised concerns with Zimbardo about the lack of ethical and moral responsibility of the researchers. It was Dr. Christina who insisted the study come to an end after only 6 days, with initial resistance from Zimbardo. After 6 days, however, Zimbardo finally ended the experiment. Zimbardo later noted, "It wasn't until much later that I realised how far into my prison role I was at that point, that I was thinking like a prison superintendent rather than a research psychologist." The conclusions from the study are that situational or environmental factors rather than dispositional factors play a significant role in the behaviours exhibited at any given time. 40 years forward, very few researchers have been able to replicate the study with a more positive outcome, despite making it more ethical. However, one recent study called the BBC Prison Experiment has shown how the same situation can lead to cooperative behaviour rather than tyranny. The Stanford Prison Experiment, much like the Milgram Obedience Experiment, has been heavily criticised for the lack of ethical protocols in place and the neglect of participant well-being. I hope you found that video useful. As always, if you've got any questions, let me know.